Good, thank you. Okay, thank you. I will start now. I'd like to thank the Legislative Assembly of Rio Grande do Norte and Bússola Tech for the opportunity to be at this esteemed conference to share experiences and learnings through making connections with colleagues from other parliaments around the world. It's a great honour and a unique opportunity to meet and to share information with colleagues from such far distances from my home and with whom Queensland has no regular connections. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity. And now I'm going to tell you that I actually don't know very much about AI, so I hope you're not expecting me to talk a lot about the detail of AI. I think that's the job of other people in the room. It's not my business. My business is working for the institution of Parliament. I work to support it to function as the cornerstone of democracy. So my job is to support the Parliament to do its job. And I'm interested in how technology can help with that. My role has been Clerk Assistant with responsibility for managing the committee office in particular for the past 10 years or so. As well as that, I work in the Legislative Assembly chamber as a clerk at the table, and that involves providing procedural advice for the Speaker and all members of Parliament. Before I came to Parliament 14 years ago, I worked for many years in the executive branch in strategic policy roles. So I'm a policy person. I'm not a tech person. In fact, while I had a basic understanding about the possibilities of AI, and I have done a bit of thinking about it, I only actually did an Introduction to AI Fundamentals course about 3 weeks ago, and that gave me some really good insights about more possibilities. So I'm going to tell you about the modernisation efforts, mainly the tech-enabled and supported ones, that help me and my team to support the Queensland Parliament. I'll also tell you about some of the things we've done which I think have helped our staff to maintain momentum towards embracing technology, which is one of the themes that's come up a few times throughout the conference so far. I'll also highlight a few more possibilities, as well as some risks that I see need to be managed. So just for context, this is where Queensland is located. Whoops, sorry. Queensland is one of 7 Australian state and 2 territory parliaments. There is also a federal Australian parliament. Australia's constitution establishes the lawmaking responsibilities for the states and the Commonwealth Parliament, with the Commonwealth Parliament being responsible for the national issues like income tax, defence, social security, telecommunications, and the states responsible for policy and law and service delivery around health, education, transport, and a range of other factors that are much more close to the people. Funding is provided by the Commonwealth to the states from taxation revenue, this Commonwealth being responsible for taxation, and that supports the states to deliver these functions. Those states do also have their own capacity to raise some revenue via sources like mining royalties. Australia is part of the Commonwealth. Whoops, sorry. Slide. Okay. Just very quickly, because it sets a bit of context, the Queensland Parliament was established in 1860 as a colonial parliament after separation from the former colony of New South Wales. So it was once a much bigger colony, an English colony in Australia. Then in 1901, federation occurred with all the states and territories combining to create the Federation of Australia. No longer colonies, it became a national body. The Queensland Parliament has been unicameral since 1922, and it's the only Australian state that is a unicameral parliament. Because of being unicameral, there are some features of our committee system in Queensland that are quite unique. We don't have an upper house to provide the same level of scrutiny over the executive government and its actions as a parliament with an upper house does, because scrutiny is often part of that upper house role. So our portfolio committee system, it was established in 2011, the current system, with committees established by the House to mirror the areas of executive, the portfolios of the executive government and ministers. This better supports the Parliament to be able to scrutinise. So each committee has responsibility for a group of portfolio areas, and for that area they look after every bit of legislation that is introduced. So our laws require that every piece of legislation gets referred to the relevant committee. And I'll talk a little more about that because that's where some of my focus on where technology can support us comes into it. Queensland has a pretty decentralised population, so it's a very big state. We have Brisbane being the capital, but there are some large coastal cities as well, and then inland is a much more sparse population. The state has, as well as we have local government system as well, and part of that system is there are 17, we call them discrete Indigenous communities that are controlled by local Indigenous councils. So the population in Queensland is 5% of people who identify as being Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people, which combined is the 5% Indigenous population. They don't all live in these council areas, but that is an option for some people if it's their traditional lands or if it's a place that they have a connection to. Okay. I don't need to tell you, I'm sure, about the functions of Parliament, but the relative focus of any particular Parliament on any aspect of those functions can vary in time and place. But all of the work we do needs to be in support of these functions in one way or another. All of the extensive powers and rights that the Parliament has, including the privileges that the Parliament has, exist purely so that the Parliament can fulfil those functions. So, since the establishment of the Portfolio Committee system in 2011, an important part of how it fulfills its scrutiny function is through these 7 portfolio committees. So, the law requires that all bills are referred to a committee for examination, and so our Bill to Act process has a formal stage called committee stage. That's every single bill. The committees also undertake inquiries into public accounts, public works and other matters of public importance within their portfolio areas, including budget examination. So they run the annual budget estimates process where government expenditure proposals are scrutinised. And each committee does that for their portfolio area. Bill inquiries are for a minimum of 6 weeks. Now I'll just show you what the sorts of things that they do. Sorry, it's not working. This one. Sorry. There we go. So bill inquiries are for a minimum of 6 weeks, and that's provided for by the Queensland Constitution and the Parliament of Queensland Act. While it was a minimum of 6 weeks, it's now become a default. It is 6 weeks, pretty standard, that committees have to do their job. And that job involves quite an extensive public engagement process. So seeking submissions, conducting research, holding public hearings and briefings, and then they prepare a report tabled in the House, and they make recommendations, and they're required to recommend whether or not the bill should be passed by the House. They can recommend amendments, but they can't draft amendments. They can only recommend the effect, so a policy recommendation, essentially. So public engagement is clearly a very central part of the inquiry process. And as well as enhancing scrutiny, this engagement in the democratic process is an important goal in itself. Okay. So why modernise? Well, essentially, I can see, if I look in that corner of the room, one of the Sustainable Development Goals is very clearly giving an imprimatur, and it makes it essential that Parliament's, the Goal 16 in particular, promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, access to justice for all, build effective, accountable and inclusive institutions at all levels. And one of the targets there is to ensure responsive, inclusive, participatory and representative decision-making at all levels. So This rests on the premise that strong public institutions create social, political and economic stability and in turn promoting peace and justice. So this target reflects a modern understanding of representation, which means more than the very basic meaning of a right to vote. It now includes an expectation that political institutions reflect community diversity and that perspectives of marginalised groups are incorporated in parliamentary deliberations regardless of formal representation via the electoral process. So, at the same time, there's considerable research evidence now that there is a declining trust in democratic institutions. As in other liberal democracies, public trust in how democracy is working in Australia has declined from 86% in 2007 to less than 41% by 2020. It coincides with a lack of trust in experts and an increasing tendency to instead people trust people who are like them. People want input into decision making. There are even calls from time to time for a fourth branch of government, which would be a permanent people's house. That's some sort of extreme. And we've seen lower levels of that in terms of setting up of models like citizens' juries, mini-publics. There are a whole range of new inclusive mechanisms that parliaments around the world are trying to use to increase public participation and provide more avenues. So essentially, the people are expecting to have a say, and they're expecting to have accessible information, and they're expecting efficient processes within their parliaments. Okay, so this creates the environment for alternative forms of government to take its place if it's not present. So that's a risk that that parliaments need to face in the context of that declining trust. Okay. I'm just going to skip through this view because I will talk to them in a bit more detail. So, to be specific about the modernisation efforts in the Queensland Parliament, we've talked a lot, there's been a lot of talk at this conference about legislative drafting. Sorry, I'm controlling two slides at the same time, so here we go. Managing the legislative drafting process has been discussed a bit at this conference. In Queensland, that is done by a separate body to the Parliament, the Office of the Queensland Parliamentary Council. They're not part of the Parliament, but we have obviously a very strong relationship with that office. They have a legislative drafting mechanised workflow or automated systems. They don't obviously do the drafting. That, as has been said, I don't think it happens anywhere that that would be an automated function, but certainly in terms of the ability to draft. I know that they have a lot of, they use, I think it's called frames, and text is put into frames and it makes it very easy to compare amendments throughout the process. But obviously there's still a very heavy human involvement in doing manual checks. And I certainly know from my own perspective, because regardless of what OQPC does, so the council office, we manually check the parchment versions of bills when they are sent back to the Parliament. We sit there and it's a long, laborious manual process that we go through. So the human element is still there. There's still a bit of a lack of trust that the technology will always get it right. The searchability of legislation is fantastic. We have a really good website, a public website for Queensland legislation. And anybody can go and see the full legislative history. So they can click on any aspect, any clause in a bill. They can see with an act when it was amended, through what was the amending mechanism. They can also see the indicative reprints, which I think is the same concept that of comparative print suites that Wade spoke about yesterday. And those are publicly available on the website. They do them for most legislation, not all, but they will always do it on request. And so it's published and available to people. They can then look at what would change. I've put the website there, but I won't show it now. So from my perspective as a user and from my team of lawyers and researchers, we find that a fantastic resource. We're finding in the committees that members are increasingly asking for the indicative reprints as part of the committee's inquiry work. And they're finding them very helpful for understanding what the impact of a bill would be. So I'm interested in a concept that was discussed yesterday, which is the idea of a formal requirement that an indicative reprint or a comparative print be tabled with a committee report to assist all members in the debate on a bill. That's something that I'd like to explore further. Okay, so as others have mentioned, broadcasting live is pretty standard now. Committee proceedings also all broadcast live when they happen in Brisbane, but I showed the size of Queensland earlier and spoke about the state, so committees do travel a lot. They travel around the state. Those are not yet broadcast, and that's an area for future development, even if we have to do it using FaceTime or YouTube or some other mechanism to our formal channels in the interim. I know some other parliaments have done that. In fact, New Zealand Parliament used, I think, YouTube exclusively for a number of years, and now they have their own system. Also, we now have automated speech recognition to create closed captioning and to produce a transcript of the footage as it happens. So that's very quick. That enables the production of an unofficial transcript. So it's much faster than waiting for the official Hansard transcript, which can take a little time when there are competing committee hearings. All of our committees all meet on one day, so as well as in between times, and it's during a sitting week, so there's a lot of pressure on the Hansard team at that time. The automated transcript production is a huge help for people, particularly staff of committees who might be needing to prepare a report to be tabled, given that very quick turnaround time I mentioned earlier. The Assembly Hansard transcripts contain links to video footage in the archives, so we keep an archive of all footage broadcast by the House and the committees. So that's always available to the public. And they also link to any papers that are tabled by members during the proceedings. So that will link to our tabled papers database, and members of the public or any user can click on that from the Hansard transcript and get to the document. Members are all able to access and clip video files for themselves, so they can go to that broadcast footage. There's a tool that they can all use, and it's very simple. They can clip what they want from their own speeches and then use that very much to promote the issues on their social media or their own web pages or other channels. I will just note there are terms and conditions of use for broadcast footage, and I'll touch on that in a minute too. So all papers tabled by members in the Assembly are published and available online shortly after they're tabled. So that's fairly quick. And then they're online and available for the media, are usually very keen to see some of them. We have a very high volume of tabled papers because there's no requirement in the Queensland Parliament for leave to be given to table papers. It's automatic right of members, and we are just generally they're expected to exercise responsibility with taking on board that right. They also remain responsible for the accuracy of anything that they table. We have, like few other parliaments, we're undergoing a significant project to digitise all of the tabled papers of the Parliament going back to 1860. And this entails scanning them all. It's been largely a manual process, and enabling optical character recognition or OCRing them to support accessibility. And then we publish them so that they're available to the public. We also do the same with committee minutes once they reach 30 years of age. The Speaker has, in fact, just released minutes from 1994 committees, and that can then prompt researchers sometimes to ask for other documents, and they can be made available as well and published outside of the cycle. So like many of our modernisation efforts, the digitisation project happens in between our usual work or our business as usual. So it has been a slow but steady process, and I think we're back to the 1930s by now, so there's still probably 70 years worth to go. We have an e-petitions system. Queensland was the first Australian state to have such an e-petitions system. So that enables members of the public to lodge formal petitions to the Assembly. They can share the link for other citizens to sign. The system ensures compliance with the rules for petitions, and it also monitors their progress, including the minister's required responses, making sure that they come through, that they're there in time. It's visible if they're not provided in time. So that's a level of transparency that's enabled by that system. Questions on notice. Standing orders allow all members to ask one question of one minister on every sitting day. This is separate to question time, which is questions without notice. The questions on notice received every sitting day are collated into a database, which then turns them into a publishable format, and they are then provided to the person who manually collates the notice paper. They're added to the notice paper, and that way that the ministers become aware of what it is that they're required to answer within 30 days. We've recently upgraded all of the AV equipment in the Legislative Assembly chamber and committee hearing rooms, and we've established 2 new purpose-fitted committee hearing rooms. And we've embarked on efforts to modernise committee reports to make them more accessible to the public and to members, using fewer words and more graphical representations where practical. And we're using a range of software products to assist with that graphical representation, but it's been pretty simple so far, mostly using things like clip art, word type things. And I'm excited to explore the AI possibilities for graphical representation of data, using fewer words, because some people love long reports, and I'm constantly having to say it's not a good report if it's 300 pages. It's too long. So. Yeah, and I also see the benefit of potentially AI for summarising and helping to identify the key themes of reports for people to help with our executive summary, which is a new thing that we're doing as well. I've mentioned all committee proceedings are broadcast. Also now it's fairly standard that video conferencing is available for people to participate in committee hearings. The size of the state means that it's really important that there are some avenues for people who live in remote areas or even just regional areas that are far from Brisbane to be able to join and have their say through committee inquiries. We have a committee meeting papers system. So the committee meeting papers system provides there's a portal that members can use to access all the meeting papers for upcoming committees. It's not just a delivery mechanism. It has capacities to do things like provide notes, share notes with individuals, other members of the committee, so that they don't have to share them with everybody. They can choose who they will share their notes with ahead of a committee meeting. It also allows for a person within the meeting to lead the meeting and take people to particular sections of the paper during the meeting. So it's a sort of fairly it's a full meeting support product, not just a paper delivery system. It also adds to security, which was an important measure in deciding what we wanted to do with committee meeting papers, because they're confidential. So it's got capacity for them all to be watermarked, which means that even if a photograph was taken of a screen, it's clear who took that photo or whose papers they were, because their name is watermarked on them. And it's available so that people can work offline as well. We've been working for a long time towards an e-submissions platform for committee submissions. We started specifying our business requirements in 2017, and we've developed business process maps and even got to the point of some quite detailed technical specifications. But resourcing has limited our capacity to progress the Rolls-Royce model that we would really like for e-submissions. And that sort of model would link subscriber databases, stakeholder databases, and enable outward communications to people. It would enable link to our publishing platform so that submissions could be published direct to the website. And also that documents received through the e-submissions channel can be filed in our electronic records management system, which is an internal repository. And we are still working towards that end. In the meantime, though, we're making do with a third-party product, a software as a service product, which we've adapted to meet our needs reasonably well. Originally used just for the high-volume sorts of committee inquiries where we get thousands of submissions, we're now recently transitioned to fully using it for all committee submissions instead of emails. It was before that it was emails, which is a laborious process for both the administration assistant who is helping to categorise them and get them ready for publication, as well as the committee secretary who's involved in analysing. So this at least groups information in categories, which helps make that job a lot easier. So it goes a little way to the solution, but not to the end yet. It's the other thing about that one is it's really quite inexpensive, but it's not the Rolls-Royce. We're also making better use of SharePoint internally to share files and share information across the Parliament between members and staff. We have some fairly good library collections, search and research request management systems. The library uses, so our research area is in the library, as well as the committee's research area is part of the committee secretariat, but this is a fairly dedicated research team. They use products like Power BI to create information for members. So when members are seeking this information, they can use that. They also have databases that records all of the research and information requests that are undertaken so that they can be more efficient and not start from scratch each time. And we've been moving to electronic forms and workflows, so this is fairly new as well. It was very much a paper-based system for things like members to claim their expenses. Now that's automated through an electronic forms system, which is much more efficient. We have multi-factor authentication for all of the systems that members use because, as you can see, a lot of these are separate systems that we are using and they don't necessarily talk to each other. But at least there is a single sign-on and multi-factor authentication process that is, I guess, integrated with all. The other fairly new exciting thing we're using is a learning management system, or an LMS, and that again is a software as a service product. So that's for developing staff training, and one of the big purposes behind it is to connect more with our electorate office staff because there are 93 electorate offices all around the state of Queensland and they are part of the parliamentary service. So we need to be better at engaging them and supporting them. That supports members to do their job as well. So I wouldn't call any of these legacy systems necessarily. Some are pretty new. And I actually had to look up what legacy systems meant, and so I'm comfortable that the definition is not met for many of them. Okay. So while we are doing a lot of modernisation, our planned next steps are towards an integrated information management system. So at the moment, we have a duplication of effort because data has to be entered more than one time because we have so many separate systems. Each system in itself is pretty good. It's just that integration that is missing, which means that we're not getting the maximum benefit we could get. So there's duplication of effort. Errors can happen when you have more than one point of reference, and that leads to frustration, time delays, and when we're all quite busy, that's very frustrating for staff. There's the room for error is a risk in terms of data breaches. There's a new data breach regime coming into play in Australia, and it's coming in at national and state levels, and it will apply to the Parliament. So the Parliament will need to report to this externally if there's a data breach, which is quite a different system to what we've had. So ultimately, there are a lot of things driving our need to integrate better. Okay. So whether we do that by sort of joining existing systems or by new integrated systems to extend our workflows, we're actively exploring. This would include aspects that are not currently automated. For example, the production of that notice paper that I mentioned, which is the agenda for the House. And member voting. We don't have member electronic voting at this stage either, which a lot of parliaments do have. I can see a huge benefit for reporting. If we were able to collate all the information from the one source, we would save so much time. Every year at annual report time, or even quarterly report time, I'm sick of having to have the same issue every year where I have to check the annual report against the budget reports, against the website reports, and always, it takes a long time to make sure that they all match or that I understand why they don't match. So I can see the benefits of having much more technology linkage to help with that. Okay. So some of the possibilities that I see, I've spoken a bit as I've gone through, but certainly research and analysis for both committees and our library research area. Committees in terms of submissions, but also like thematic analysis of submissions, but also for, I suppose, pointing to where they might find information about the topic under inquiry, literature reviews. I can see the benefit for drafting procedural advice if we had access to a precedence database that was more than a big Word document that we have now. It's a great big Word document that's getting slow because it's so big, and it's just using a word search function at the moment. So that's an obvious one where we would get a lot of benefit. To reference precedents, standing orders, conventions. I can also see potential for interaction with online forums, so going to where the people are, and this is for committees in particular. If committees were able to identify where's a conversation happening about this issue that I'm inquiring into, and then they could, first of all, identify it. That might be enough to then have a human go join in the discussion, but it could also be an opportunity to potentially have some automated information sent to join that discussion and direct people to the Parliament's inquiry webpage. So that's something that I'm not sure if it's possible, but it would be great. Translations, not just language, but also I can see a huge benefit in having easy formats. So not just for simplifying concepts for the general public, but we could engage more people. Say we had an inquiry recently into housing for people with intellectual disability, and we had to collaborate with an external advocacy organisation who prepared a document for the committee to use, which was an easy English version designed for people with intellectual disability. I can see the benefit of getting a draft of that sort of thing from using AI. It could also help with geographic and demographic tailoring of information about telling people why this is relevant to you, and therefore how to make a submission to an inquiry. budget analysis. Because all of our portfolio committees do the budget estimates process, if they were able, at the moment it's a reasonably political process, but it would be really good for portfolio committees to be able to produce readily, and they're not economists, but to be able to readily produce comparisons of expenditure by area, for example, over years, and that would then prompt questions of the government, and graphics for publications and reports, as I've said. One of the risks, obviously, around AI is that words have more than one meaning, and I just took a nice quote that I liked from a poet, Ted Hughes, which is, "Every word has its own solar system of meaning." And I went to AI and said, what does this mean? And it told me that Ted Hughes's concept means that each word, like a planet in its own solar system, carries a unique set of meanings and associations, and those meanings are interconnected and complex. And he also saw that the poetry belongs to the reader, not the author. So I thought that was an interesting concept to explore as we start to look into AI possibilities and the risks. Okay. And I guess one of the things about being a subnational parliament and not having the same resources as a national parliament might have is that we think creatively. So we often will find multiple uses for the one platform. For example, our committee's e-submission platform, we use that also for staff or member surveys. We can use it for our parliamentary interns to submit papers for marking. And we use it for RSVP, or responses from stakeholders, to indicate if they would like to come and speak at a public hearing or just attend a public hearing, so we can organise an appropriate venue. And another example is our learning management system, which can also be used for facilitating online engagement between committees and stakeholders. And I haven't explored this yet, but this is on my list. I want to look at using some of its features like electronic whiteboards, information videos, quizzes, surveys, to see if that might be a useful channel for people to participate in committee inquiries. It's also got huge potential for our parliamentary education programs, particularly for reaching outside of Brisbane where people can't come in to the office, and our schools around the state. We deliver education programs to them as well. Okay, I've touched on a few risks as I've gone through, and this is an obvious one, just the fact of hallucinations or deliberate misuse. So when there's untrustworthy content, that will lead to poorly informed debate and deliberations. Also, there's a concern that information which is incorrect might be protected by parliamentary privilege and unable to be questioned if it's in some way. So all of those things lead to reputational damage, which in turn impacts on the public trust, which is the problem we're trying to address. So that was one risk. Just another resourcing issue in a subnational parliament. I think this was mentioned earlier today, the benefits of planning together with other parliaments, coming up with some, common foundations would be a much more efficient way than everybody doing their own thing, when there are so much of the business process is in common. Okay. One of the other things we've been doing is business process mapping, and this is in the committee office in particular. So we're not doing it necessarily as part of preparing for anything. We've just been doing it every time we have an opportunity, say a dissolution period of Parliament where it's a little quieter. We've been identifying efficiencies in our processes within the committee office. And as part of that, we identify automation possibilities. It doesn't mean that we're going to get a brand new system for everything, but we can often, it might be something quite simple. It might be just that we can share a file on SharePoint instead of sending 6 emails, for example. And it also serves as a base for a gap analysis for when we do get to the system stage. And I'll just show you a couple. So this is the one that we've done. We use this swimming lane model that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, but it's really useful for identifying where the connections are with other areas where communication is needed. So staff really enjoy these sessions because they are able to bring ideas, they bring their frustrations about what's not working, and we work together collaboratively to try and address the issues and come up with new ways. It's one part of a continuous improvement practice, but a really important thing about it, as well as leading to real efficiencies, it actually keeps people in a change mode. They're ready for change. It's normal. And our intent ultimately is that, yes, we have a head start in terms of a gap analysis if when we move to a more integrated system. Just another example. Again, some of the risks are about, and these are ones that Ornella mentioned earlier, about exclusion of groups that really need to be included, because even though a lot of the goal is to try and get information, give access to people in remote areas, in Queensland they don't all have even internet access. It's not all areas are covered adequately for internet. There can also be inappropriate inclusion and that's whether that's by bots, and I'll just show an example of one which you might be familiar with there from the Scottish Parliament, but this was an inquiry into voluntary assisted dying, and there were thousands of submissions generated by bots to that, but it was picked up, but it's obviously a risk. There's another risk here where this was somebody who the Australian government ran a poll, one of its committees ran a poll on citizenship rules, and it was apparently being completed by people from overseas countries saying, yes, you should broaden your citizenship rules. So, okay. So I guess, and associated with that is just the risk of digital content, especially broadcast footage, for example, and video submissions, because we are also accepting submissions made by video from some people, and the potential for those to be misused, despite the fact that people are required to agree to terms and conditions. They don't necessarily always. It's quite rare, but it does happen that people will misuse that material. And we had a recent case that I was going to show you the slides, and I decided I didn't want to perpetuate it any further because it was really nasty, with some information being... it was a woman who filmed herself watching a witness giving evidence to a committee inquiry and had very nasty commentary all through it, including identifying the witness, where the witness worked, and it was quite unpleasant. The question obviously arises then to parliamentary privilege and how far it can reach to protect this information that was given to the Parliament, and then also how that interacts with legal issues or legal opportunities for people, because it's something that's happening outside Parliament, to take action through the courts as well. So that's probably something that needs a lot more exploring too. And that is where I'll leave it. And I think I'm almost right on time, which unfortunately it doesn't leave an awful lot of question time.